An on-camera clash between the president of a global superpower and the head of a smaller country beset by war rarely unfolds in such a raw and unfiltered manner as it did when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited the White House. The images of a visibly tense meeting in the Oval Office, followed by the abrupt cancellation of a joint press conference, quickly spread around the globe. Although tensions between Washington and Kyiv had been rumored for some time, few anticipated that a bilateral meeting would unravel so spectacularly. The day began with Zelenskyy's arrival at the White House to discuss two core matters: continuing U.S. military and financial support for Ukraine in its conflict against Russia, and a minerals deal offering the United States rights to valuable Ukrainian resources. In principle, both sides had much to gain from an amicable resolution. Ukraine stood to deepen its ties with its most important military backer, while the Trump administration hoped to clinch an agreement that could be touted as beneficial to American strategic and economic interests. As Zelenskyy entered the Oval Office, the presence of reporters signaled the usual protocol: friendly handshakes, pre-scripted remarks, and perhaps a short question-and-answer session. Instead, what unfolded was an increasingly charged debate. President Donald Trump began by reiterating his desire for a swift peace settlement, suggesting that endless American arms shipments might encourage Ukrainian intransigence at the negotiating table. Vice President JD Vance echoed these sentiments, emphasizing what he termed diplomacy as the only way to end the war. Their stance was that Ukraine should exhibit more openness to compromise with Russia. Zelenskyy, sensing the direction of the conversation, calmly pointed out that Russia's past behavior in violating signed agreements made compromise difficult. He reminded the Americans that Russian forces had disregarded multiple ceasefire deals, killing Ukrainian soldiers and civilians even after paperwork was signed. He also expressed concern that granting concessions without strict guarantees would merely pave the way for further encroachments by Moscow. From his viewpoint, seeking peace at any price could mean relinquishing key parts of Ukraine's territory or legitimizing what he described as illegal occupation. Vance seized on Zelenskyy's remarks, accusing him of trying to litigate the conflict in front of the American press, as though the Ukrainian leader were there to shame the administration publicly. The frustration mounted when Vance asked why Zelenskyy had not shown more gratitude for the extensive U.S. assistance. Zelenskyy, who had publicly thanked the American government numerous times, tried to clarify that he remained deeply appreciative but could not afford to ignore the realities of Russian aggression. Trump's irritation seemed to grow with every defense Zelenskyy offered, culminating in Trump accusing Ukraine of gambling with World War III. Matters came to a head when Zelenskyy stated that while he recognized the importance of American help, he also felt compelled to highlight the risks to global security if Russian expansionist ambitions were not decisively curbed. Trump and Vance viewed this as confrontational, suggesting that Zelenskyy was telling them how they should feel about foreign policy. The final straw seemed to occur when Zelenskyy underscored Ukraine's lone stand during the earliest days of the war, describing how critical it was that U.S. hardware arrived only after Ukrainians had already begun defending their homeland. Trump retorted that Obama-era aid was minimal compared to his own administration's support, thus implying Zelenskyy should be more deferential. When reporters were escorted out of the room, the dispute apparently grew even more intense. Accounts from insiders indicate that Secretary of State Marco Rubio attempted to salvage the situation, arguing in favor of completing the minerals deal. Yet Vice President Vance stood firm that Zelenskyy's comportment was disrespectful, and Trump agreed. The president then signaled that the meeting had gone off the rails, concluding that the official lunch and joint press conference would serve no purpose. Within the hour, the Ukrainian delegation, which had been waiting in another section of the White House, was told the visit was over. The repercussions were immediate. Trump posted a pointed statement that Zelenskyy disrespected the United States and was unwelcome to return until he was ready for peace. This left no doubt that the administration believed Ukraine was deliberately prolonging the conflict. Zelenskyy, shown in footage rushing out of the White House into a waiting vehicle, later released his own brief message of thanks to the American people and reasserted his commitment to achieving a just and lasting peace. By mid-afternoon, all that remained of what was supposed to be a landmark event was a series of accusatory social media posts, canceled speaking appearances by Zelenskyy elsewhere in Washington, and a cacophony of reactions from politicians worldwide. In Congress, the divide was stark. Some Republican lawmakers echoed Trump's position, demanding that Zelenskyy show unequivocal gratitude and sign onto a diplomatic framework rather than persist in a costly war. Others, especially among the Democrats, denounced the spectacle as a betrayal of an ally battling a clear aggressor. They warned that any weakening of support for Ukraine could embolden Russia, potentially leading to further territorial expansions or a more volatile Europe. European leaders, in turn, rushed to reaffirm their solidarity with Zelenskyy, underscoring that Ukraine remains a sovereign country that was invaded without provocation. Leaders in France and Germany, in particular, criticized attempts to portray both sides as equally culpable. Meanwhile, Russia's leadership expressed unbridled glee. Officials in Moscow crowed that the American president had essentially acknowledged Ukraine's lack of leverage, framing Trump's remarks as validation of Russian claims that Zelenskyy is obstinate. Russian commentators on state media insisted that Washington was losing patience with Ukraine, speculating that it might reduce the shipments of weapons and ammunition that have helped stall Russian advances. For them, the spectacle at the White House was an affirmation of Putin's long-held goal to fracture Ukrainian alliances. Whether the fallout from this meeting will translate into a substantive shift in policy remains uncertain. Even a partial diminution of American support could be catastrophic for Ukraine, forcing Kyiv to make territorial concessions it has refused to consider. Conversely, if Congress remains committed to aiding Ukraine, there might be a workaround to bypass some of the executive branch's reluctance. Zelenskyy may also turn more urgently toward European partners for additional resources. In the end, the abortive White House meeting offered a jarring glimpse of how quickly diplomatic interactions can dissolve when personal resentments and divergent strategic aims collide. Zelenskyy cannot easily heed Trump's calls for a swift peace without inviting domestic backlash and compromising his nation's sovereignty. Trump and Vance, on the other hand, clearly regard a prolonged conflict as a needless drain on American resources and a potential geopolitical danger. These opposed visions appear difficult to reconcile, leaving the partnership at an impasse and raising serious questions about the prospects for a negotiated end to one of the most significant conflicts in Europe since the mid-20th century.